Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We're learning Mishna Kesubos, Perek chapter 12, Mishna Beis, Mishna 2. So yesterday's Mishnah discussed a case where a man marries a woman and he takes upon himself to support her daughter for 5 years. In the meantime, they get divorced. She marries another man. She makes a deal with him, 5 years support for her daughter. And at the end of the day, we say that each man is obligated to support the girl for 5 years. They took upon themselves this obligation. They made no stipulations. And therefore, at the end of the day, they both have to support. And the Mishnah concluded saying that when they overlap, that one supplies the food, and one gives her the money, the value of the food. So Mishnah Beis continues with that scenario. Nises. Now let's say this girl who has two men, right? Two men that are supporting her already. She gets married. Now she's got a husband to support her. Says the Mishnah, Habal noisin la mezainis. It's now the husband who gives her the food. V'hei noisin la demei mezainis. And the other two give her the value of the food. That means at the end of the day, these are three independent obligations. The husband has an obligation to feed and to support his wife. He can't say, she's already got two other guys that are obligated to support her. I don't have to do it. No, you have your obligation. The other two men, at the end of the day, they took upon themselves this obligation for 5 years. They have to keep it. Now, she's already getting her food from her husband, so therefore, they will give her the value of the food. So, Habal Noisin La Mezainis, the husband gives her the food, Vei Noisin La Demei Mezainis, and they, meaning the other two men, the one ex-husband and husband of her mother, are going to be giving her the value of the food. Okay. Now, the next part of the Mishnah goes into another subject, and it's worthwhile for the introduction that they give here. So here we go. Some of this we're going to be familiar with. Usually, when one person borrows money from another person, or accepts to pay him for some other reason, meaning when you become obligated to pay somebody money, and the debt is recorded in a document, a lien is attached to the borrower's land. This means that if the borrower sells land after the date in the document, the lender can seize the land from the buyer, right? However, one exception to the last law is a father's obligation to support his own daughters after he dies. One of the stipulations in the Ksuba is that if a man dies, his young daughters, meaning his daughters before they have become betrothed, engaged to someone, meaning, or before they reach the age of Bagris, meaning until 12 and a half, he is obligated, his estate is obligated to support his young daughters. Okay, this is an obligation that now he makes to them. Although this obligation is recorded in the Ksuba document, it's recorded in the document, and even if it wouldn't be considered, even if it for some reason was recorded in the document, or there was no document, the halacha is it's as if it's written in a document. Now, it's important to know that any time a lien is attached to a person's property, it's only if it's a recorded obligation. It has to be recorded, at least recorded. And then after the date of the record, anything sold, it has a lien on it. Okay? But in the case of his own daughters, who have a right to take support from his estate, those daughters may not seize land that the father had sold. Any other creditor has a lien on this land. They don't. They don't receive a lien on the land. Although it's an obligation to them, it's a recorded obligation to them, it's an absolute obligation to them, nonetheless, they are not like a regular creditor that has a lien on the land and can take away the land that was sold after the time of the ksuba. The reason for this is the following. It's because typically the problem here is that this obligation of supporting daughters is something that is really you can't estimate it. You can't figure out how much it's going to be because we're talking about over the man's lifetime. So you go ahead, you're buying a piece of land from this man, right? So you want to say to yourself, maybe there's a lien on the land, and somebody's going to be taken away from me. So go out and find out how much money he owes someone. And then you can go ahead and buy a piece of land and figure out how much you need to kind of set aside in case it gets taken away because of the debt. But you can't do that by the support for the daughters. Because by the support for the daughters, over the time, you don't know how many daughters are going to be. You don't know how long they'll be single for. You can't estimate it. So being that you can't estimate how much money, how much of the land may be taken away from what you bought, people are not going to buy land. They're not going to want to buy land because it can come out that they buy a piece of land and who knows how much of it is going to be taken away from them because of the support for the daughters. And therefore, the Chachamim said, when it comes to this obligation of supporting the young daughters from his estate, there is no lien on it. If the land was sold during his lifetime, there is no lien and they cannot take it away from the buyers. However, there's going to be a difference between his own daughters that we just gave this whole introductory to and his stepdaughter. The stepdaughter that he obligated himself to pay, which had nothing to do with a ksuba. It's an outside obligation. It's an outside obligation. It's an outside obligation actually to a specific person for a specific amount of time. And therefore, the Mishnah says like this, Mesu, let's say these two men died. They died. Okay. Their own daughters are only supported from property that's free, meaning property that doesn't have a lien on it. But she, meaning the stepdaughter, that they accepted upon themselves to support, she's actually going to go ahead and be able to collect from properties that do have a lien on them. Meaning we're showing that this is life, but this is the nature of the obligation. Because this girl, this daughter, who they obligated themselves to pay 5 years for, she's like a creditor. She's like a regular creditor. Again, now to be like a creditor, as pointed out by the Bartanura, it has to either be this deal of the 5 years has to be written in a document, or they made a kinyan. Went through a transaction to make this obligation. In these situations, we say that the news gets around about this. So people are aware of when they buy a piece of land, they're aware that they're taking a chance. However, if let's say, as we mentioned this yesterday, this obligation to support the stepdaughter for 5 years can be binding just by stating it in front of two witnesses. That also makes it binding, but it won't give you a lien on it. She won't get a lien on his property for that. It's only if it's in a document or they made a kinyan, they made a transaction. That is when she's like a creditor and there's a lien on the property for it to take it away from those who bought it during his lifetime. But if all he did was make this up in front of witnesses, it's binding, but there's no lien on his land. But the point of the Mishnah is that we have this call it a bit of an irony or whatever you call it. But the point is that this obligation to the stepdaughter is like a regular obligation. It's like a loan. And although a man's own daughters are not able to take away, there's no lien on his property regarding his own daughter's support after he dies. And that land that he sold during his lifetime, they cannot take away from the buyers. She, meaning the stepdaughter who they promised to support, and became obligated to support, she would be able to take away the land from the buyers because she does get a lien on the man's property. So that if he dies, she can go and if she dies, there is nothing there she can't get anything from anything from the estate. She can go ahead and go to the buyer. The Mishnah concludes, getting back to this whole deal about the man getting married to this woman who has a daughter, and they make up that he's going to support her. The people who were clever, the people who were on the ball, the people who were smart, they used to write the following in these kinds of scenarios. Okay, we'll get married on the condition that I will support your daughter for 5 years. Kolzman sha'at imi. As long as you are with me. In yesterday's Mishnah, we learned, if he divorces the woman, does he still have to support her daughter? Yes. If she dies, does he still have to support her daughter? Yes. If he dies, he still has to go in and support her daughter. So at the end of the day, well, let's see how far this goes. At the end of the day, if he makes a stipulation, I support you for 5 years as long as you are with me, then if you're not with me, there's no obligation. That means if they get divorced, or he dies or she dies, are they together anymore? No. And therefore, at that point, you wouldn't be obligated anymore to have to support her. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi.